do something like this, the same cat, new, you provide a cat, and then let's say you have a constructor that takes a name. We saw that. That was that constructor right there. For those who may have skipped that part, here is that constructor. This constructor right here is the one that simply takes the name of the cat. Well, here it is. I'm calling that constructor, but I can still say, though I'm calling the constructor that will set the cat's name, I want to set the age directly to 10. Now this one is wasteful because whatever the cat name is, we're going to set the name of the cat, but first that would have been set to the default value. So this is a bit less efficient than if we did it this way, okay? Okay, there's all kinds of things that you can do with that. Now this is, when I say there's all kinds of things, this is the type of thing when you say, I really want to be good at C#, which you don't have to. You can have another language that you really enjoy, like Python. In that case, I say, I hope that if that's what you enjoy, that you get really good at Python, that you can answer all the technical questions and that you know your syntax and you know the little trick and everything. I'm just letting you know that for C#, this is what you have. If you like the language, if you say I'm going to write a lot of code in C#, I'm going to be writing games in Unity, which uses C#, well then I want to know all those details. I want my game to be efficient. So I want to know these kind of tricks, about why do they have all these different ways of initializing things, what really happens when you initialize an object. Okay? So that was that little part. So in our case, we want to do something a little different. I'm going to make this bigger now for people in the back. So here we are. So when we were talking about the candlestick, we had the default constructor. We had a constructor where if you passed it all the information, it gave it to you. Yes?
Question, why do we keep the default constructor and we create a new one instead of modifying it?
Okay, so why do we keep the default constructor when we need a new one?
Yeah, why don't we modify their default constructor?
Now, what do you mean by modifying the default constructor? What would you change?
Like giving them properties.
Well, so you would put something in here.
Yeah.
Or are you saying you would change the argument?
Yeah, both.
Well, if you change the argument, you don't have the default constructor anymore.
Do we need it?
Good question. So now you might say, hey, I don't need the default constructor. As a matter of fact, and again here, this is where you got to do this stuff, and more importantly, you have to ask questions just like that. Because if you're curious and you go look for the answer, you open a door and you go, whoa, look at all this beautiful stuff that I didn't know, and the reason they did that. Here's a trick. In C#, let's say you did not specify any constructor, okay? What happens? I mentioned that before. Does anybody know the answer?
It gets auto-generated.
You get automatically a default constructor that looks like this. Okay? Now, why will be the answer also to the question you just asked. Because now you say, well, let's say I only wanted this kind of construction. I will pass the date, the open, the hide, the roll, the close. I don't need a default mode. I'm always going to give you that. Okay? So I'm going to write this constructor. Okay? Well, as I've said, if you do not provide any constructor in C#, you get a default constructor. Okay? But the moment you provide a constructor, you go ahead and you write this thing. Poof, the default constructor disappears, the one that was given to you. Okay? So let's say we did not have this. Okay? We don't have this, but we write this. This thing, the people at Microsoft said, you know what? If indeed you provide me a constructor, you must know what you're doing. Who am I to tell you you should have a default constructor? I'm not going to give you a default constructor. You seem to know what you're doing. You just wrote another constructor that takes argument and maybe another one and another one. So I'm not providing the default constructor because you know what you're doing. Okay? So you know what you're doing, and you don't provide one of these. me the following thing. How would you create an array of candlesticks? Everybody, think about that. How do you create an array of, I say candlestick, but it could be anything. How would you do that? If I say that something is an array of candlesticks, first I would kind of have to specify how many elements in the array. You don't just say this is an array, you always have to say the size of the array. Do we agree? Okay, so let's say I'm creating an array of 10 candlesticks. So in each one of the elements of the array, what do you have?
Candle.
A candlestick. Nothing exists just like that. It's like us. Each and every one of us was constructed, conceived. Well, your candlesticks in the array would have had to have been created. How do you create an object? We call it constructor. If it's now, can you construct an array where each element is somehow built differently? No. So the only way to construct the objects that go in an array is through which constructor? The default constructor. Now you have to have one. Again, if you create your own, the one given to you that you don't see disappears. Your stuff can work, but what won't you be able to build? An array of your object. Because to create an array, the individual objects have to be constructed, and the only way that they can all be constructed, when you cannot give any parameters, after all, you can't say, I want an array of 1,000 candlesticks. The first one should have this date, this high, this low, this close. The second one should have, can you imagine how many parameters you'd have to pass? You can't do it. So when you create an array, every element in the array is created with the default constructor. And if there's no default constructor and you try to create an array of object, poof, you'll get an error, which will probably seem really complicated, like, what's wrong? Why can't I create the array? Well, you gotta know these things, you know. The reason you can't create the array is because you got rid of the default constructor, so I have no way of creating the array. Similarly, you can have a default constructor, but what happens if instead of making it public, you make it private? The outside world can't use that constructor. Now you can do that to make sure that, for instance, nobody can create things by default, except for the class itself. All kind of neat little tricks that you can do, but you have to know the stuff, okay? So your answer is, no, we can't just modify, get rid of this, and say, I'm just gonna use this particular constructor. Okay? You need this in case you are going to want to create arrays, or if you ever decide, I need to just say, new candlestick, just give me a candlestick with all the default values, because I want to do something with that. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. I say that because I remember when I was a little bit older than you, when all of this came out, when I was looking at it, and I was saying, this is absolutely cool. I would just sit, still books at the time, you know. I would just read the books because I don't know, I'm weird that way. I love that stuff, and I read it, and that's how I got to know these things. Nobody taught me what I'm teaching you. You're kind of fortunate in the sense that I can say, yeah, I remember all the things I had to do, the detour that I took that led me nowhere, and then a better understanding, and I try to say, okay, here, understand that. This is why you need a default constructor. This is why you could make it private. This is when you don't need the constructor. All of this is in the book, it's in the documentation. And the only way I can understand someone going in deep into that is if they say, God, I love this stuff. If you don't, well, there's a lot to learn, and it's easy to say, I don't like this stuff, I just don't want to waste my time, and you don't, you know. But there are consequences to that if this is where you want to work. Okay, so here we are. This was candlestick, and then we had yet another constructor. Remember that puppy over here? That constructor where we say, hey, just give me a string, and I can construct a candlestick from the string. This is the one where the string was whatever you would read from the file that had a date, followed by an open, a high or low or close and the volume. And so we had to do a few things, like we had to split the string data, okay? So we took the data, which is a string, we asked it to split itself. Once it split itself, we then went ahead and in every every subpart of data. There were 6 of them. We would parse the first one into a date, okay? Then this number, the next one in the array that we got was split into a decimal, which was our open, and that's how we got the open, the high, the low, the close. And the last guy in the set of substring was the volume, and that one was an unsigned long, and so we would parse the 5th element number 5 of the array, which had 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which were 6 of them. And that particular constructor is the one where you say, hey, I'm gonna give you a string, and from that string, poof, create a candlestick.